Hello, welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events in which we explore the underlying connections and root causes that help us discover what is really true and can even help reshape the focus of our lives. Today we're going to discuss forgiveness and universal racism, and we will probably wander a few other places as well. But who knows? We'll see where that goes. How you doing today?
Pretty good.
Busy day?
Yeah, it's been a busy week.
Busy week?
We've had about a week and a half off here, maybe 2 weeks.
Who?
Without a podcast.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
I had the computer gave up the ghost and had to order parts and learn how to fix it, but it ended up being not too bad.
Yeah, they're kind of fun to fix. Those little laptops. Screw off the back.
Yeah.
Ancient people, they didn't have computers.
Yeah, I had a thought. So
Ancient people.
you and I were talking a little bit about how Americans react to people with accents, and particular certain accents, if they're language learners or if they're from the southern part of the United States. You know, we make assumptions that, oh, you don't speak English well, maybe you're not as intelligent. Right?
Yeah, redneck jokes.
And then I've been thinking a lot about ancient peoples, and we also assume, and I think there's some evolutionary biology mixed in there, that we assume that the ancient people were less intelligent, that they had lower quality of wisdom and other things. But what also we assume with them, less so I think with people from the South, is that there's some innocence to these ancient or people. And I think both of them are wrong.
What do you mean when you say innocence? What do you mean by that?
I was talking to a friend, and he was talking about how if we could just dismantle civilization and go back to the innocence of like the Native
purity.
Americans.
Yeah.
Right. There's a term for it.
Yeah.
I can't. It just doesn't come to mind really quickly. But it sprung out of sort of philosophers blaming society
The tabula
for corruption.
rasa.
Yeah.
Rousseau.
Yeah. There you go.
Walden.
Right.
Walden Pond. Getting back to nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. That there's a more virtue in that.
Correct.
Which is not biblical, especially when you get the idea that the story, the arc line, the big arc line, if you go Genesis, Revelation, is garden to city.
Right.
I personally don't like that as much. I don't enjoy a city, but there's something developmental that God has intended for the human race.
Well, to go along with that, though, Babylon, the great city, is also brought with corruption.
Have a negative. I know.
The Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
It's the descendants of Cain who are marked as noted as developing cities and technology.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea. I thought of it in terms of, at least this part of it, that it's not a wrong thing. It's the fact that we can't get rid of our corruption. So everything we build, whatever good direction we go, we carry along this poison with us.
Right.
And we distort it. And it's just easier to conclude. It's kind of embarrassing how bad we are, in a sense, how diseased we are, let's say. And it's just easier just to say, well, it must be the problem here is that we built something we weren't intended to build.
Well, and if you take it, like if you're living in the city and you're surrounded by this corrupt decadence next to homelessness and filth.
Yeah.
And then you go out on a hiking trail.
Yeah.
You go out into nature, some weird version of nature where all the predators have been removed.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody and all the animals are happy to see you.
Yeah.
It's easy to see why you would almost spiritualize that. I mean, a lot of people in Oregon do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We just went to Hawaii for our 30th anniversary, and we'd gone there a time or two before, but and we ended up on the Big Island, which is laid back, less touristy. And it was interesting to notice the feelings that I had of tempting feelings that this is paradise. And people would say it over and over. And I began to realize, A, that is not true. If you live here, that's not true. And then B, I began to realize that, you know what else is happening here? We are calling paradise any peaceful, quiet, blue sky, sunshine, ocean water, all these physical things. God is nowhere in the picture of this peaceful Eden.
Right.
Right? It is just assumed that this is paradise.
Yeah.
Because it's warm, it's, all these tropical things. it's like, oh man, how quickly we just step into the wrong thing. But
Well, and what I'm seeing too is that when you're actually in nature as it is uninterrupted by us, it's incredibly dangerous.
yeah, yeah,
It's out to get you, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so Hawaii has a lot of safety that when I go to Africa, for example,
yeah, yeah.
and I
that's
say,
right.
"Oh, we should go on a hike," right? There's incredible jungles.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll
yeah.
see chimpanzees, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Well, we don't hike."
yeah, yeah,
What do you mean? Well, there's
Yeah.
snakes.
yeah,
Like, oh, I saw a snake once. Like, no, they chase you and kill
yeah,
you,
yeah,
and the chimpanzees will kill you too. Like,
yeah.
nature is not what they're
That's
hoping
the same
for.
with Alaska, the last frontier. I'll tell you the story another time, but I got pulled into the ocean out of a boat.
Whoa.
A fishing line caught my leg and pulled me over.
Yeah.
And, that's minutes from death.
Yeah, it's
if,
cold,
if
cold
you don't
water.
get out. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous place.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but I think you have a good point. Ancient people, intelligence and innocence. I was thinking about it in terms of I think we're really susceptible to it now because our technology. We live in a way the world has never lived before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've often thought about this, and I'm still thinking about it. This idea that the last now which should say 150 years, humanity by and large, at least especially in America, but it's spread across the world. We live in a way nobody in the world lived for thousands of years. We are disconnected from our ancestors in a way. So for all of humanity up until that point, there was a commonality.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was shared. Even if you were Pharaoh and the lowliest serf, you couldn't get away from the hot sun necessarily. You might have a little bit of palm, or maybe the water. You could live by the water and they couldn't.
Right. The breeze.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a few things you could do, but the way of living was fundamentally the same. And I just continue to be fascinated by that, and even think to myself, I think we tend as Christians to be really judgmental really fast, and to find the problem in things. What if there is also the idea that as humanity we are like God's children in a sense. We're growing up.
Yeah.
It's okay to be an 8-year-old at some point. It's okay to be 12. It's okay to be 15. There's things you don't know, and it's okay. It's okay to learn. There are growing pains.
Sure.
You make mistakes. We were just talking about this, reading the one story in Scripture about Jesus being 12, and whether the accusation, why have you done this to us? His mom says, did he do something wrong?
Right.
And we concluded that, we have to believe he did not commit a sin, but yes, he did do something wrong. Not the wrong that's moral, but the element of a 12-year-old boy doesn't realize the communications he has to make.
Yeah.
He just doesn't know those things yet, and it's okay to learn them. It's okay to grow and understand. It's okay to make mistakes and not realize. And I've thought about us as a civilization. We're 150 years into a way we've never been before. Of course, there's a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Technology, we're making a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, the technology in particular. Part of what I think we're losing. So, I think what drives our desire for technology, which is what's creating it, right? We're putting the funds as a culture. We're putting in massive amounts of money into technology because it's a market for it. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So they're funding it because they know we'll buy it.
Okay.
So, but part of what fuels us to want everything new is that we have rejected the culture of our parents.
That's true.
We've sort of said anything that's older, and you could say maybe this started in the hippies. Anybody, you don't
that's a
trust
good
anyone
point.
over 30 or whatever they
Technology
said.
exacerbates that, doesn't it?
It does in a
Because-
way that I was thinking of,
That's
one of
really
the
a good point.
strategies of a manipulative or even an abusive person who's trying to work with kids is to draw them away from deep connection and reliable family relationships.
Yeah,
and say
yeah.
only I understand you.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I feel that in this cultural moment when people are looking at some of the materials around social emotional learning in schools.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've talked on here, but I've had debates with high school counselors who tell kids and post on social media, if your parents don't
Yeah.
accept your gender identity, then I'll be your mother.
Yeah.
And that's like the biggest abuser grooming
Yeah.
for
Right.
if not abuse,
Yeah.
then at least an incredible vulnerability
Yeah.
to bring a kid into a total wasteland,
Yeah.
totally disconnected from anything reliable, anyone
Yeah.
who cares for you.
And what you're saying is it's tapping into something from a technology side that is happening that has some genuineness in it, but it's creating a distorted moment.
Yeah.
So the question I think would be interesting is let's go back to 1850, pre-industrial revolution, right?
Yeah.
So you grew up in 1850, and you with your ma and pa, right?
Right. Are we talking 1850 and your British aristocracy?
No,
or
it doesn't
1850
matter.
and
Well,
your
I'm
Little
just
House on the
thinking-
Prairie?
I'm thinking, let's go Little House on the Prairie.
Okay.
Do the people do the kids have a moment when they think they know everything and their parents don't know anything? Because that happens all the time now.
It's a constant. Sure.
It's a constant.
Well, and it's
Did
literally
it-
true. Like, I was hanging out with students, and they're like, "Oh, you don't know this
There
pop
are
musician?
some things
you don't know
about
that
it's
lingo?"
true.
Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, but
right.
what they do is they take this couple things and they extrapolate from that and say it must be everything.
Right.
And they do have some truth in terms of the lingo like that.
Yeah.
Music, they're always up on cutting edge music. We tend to like the things we had as a kid. Technology things, but did, Laura Ingalls, did she feel that way? Did Nellie feel that way with her mom? Did a prairie kid, when they're 12, 13, 14, and their mind begins to awaken as an adolescent, did they come to a place when they grew that they thought their parents didn't know anything?
I would say it. I'm sure it happened,
Yeah.
but I think there's a serpent in the garden sort of dynamic that our kids are surrounded by serpents,
Well, and even if you say
drawing them away.
serpent is fine, but also just say, does the technology exacerbate that phenomena?
Yeah.
And make it something that is constant, regular, and almost has the feel of truth to it.
Well, so I was listening to a thing about how technology is impacting corporate executives who are trying to lead in an environment that's just constantly changing.
Yeah.
And they're saying it's basically impossible now because of how many new skills you have to acquire
Yeah.
annually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
yeah,
before it was like, oh, I went to school, I got trained, somebody mentored me, I know how to do this job.
Yeah.
But it's not just, it's like tech platforms that
Yeah.
what AI is going to do.
Well, this is what I was
All that
thinking about.
stuff.
I know there's so much interesting stuff. Did you see there's people questioning AI? They're really frightened about what has happened. Did you read the article about the guy who went around the algorithm?
Oh,
He asks an AI to pretend he doesn't have his programmers programmed, and it ends up he writes a conservative article.
Yeah, I saw that.
And people got really upset. And they said, we will make sure this does never happen again.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Right? But what I think about the image that flashed on my mind when you're saying that was a kid, let's call him 15 or 16, raging hormones, and life is confusing and it's a whirlwind. He doesn't know that that's not normal, that it won't stay that way.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know that there's a lot going on there. In a sense, that's what I hear when you say that, the corporate boards, technology-wise, it's a crazy.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's just a part of growing into something, because it can't stay like that. It's just not worth it then.
Well, if
it stays like
if
that.
you can't have experience, and I think this is part of what we were talking about, the difference between a corporation that took 50 years to develop into something that has this kind of global impact on the economy versus Facebook took 5 years.
Yeah,
right? And now you're seeing companies, OpenAI.
Yeah.
It had 1 million users in a couple hours.
Yeah.
Facebook,
Yeah.
it took a couple months.
Yeah.
And so they're basically creating billion-dollar valuations almost instantly.
Yeah.
And so what happens is you lose the foundation.
I know it.
It's like you're building out the house before you can even let the cement
Or
dry.
how about this an example? If you think Jesus turning water into wine was the way you're going to live for the next 3 years as his disciple, you'd be sorely mistaken, right?
Yeah.
That's nothing is like that. It does happen.
Yep.
But that's not the way it normally happens.
So I keep thinking about the Tower of Babel because I've been digging deep into this stuff in the last few weeks. And the idea of part of God's judgment on a society that says we are going to make a name for ourselves and work our way to heaven on our own terms is confusion and division. And watching our political environment where literally the battle is around what words mean.
I know it.
It's like, oh, we don't even speak the same language anymore. That sounds familiar as I'm reading these ancient texts.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Because part of the... So so then I connect just now in this conversation the idea of the fifth commandment to honor your father and mother, which is the commandment with a promise that'll go well with you, that you'll live long on the earth. And I say, okay, so our society has broken, as a rule, the fifth commandment.
As a fact, even.
Yes. And so what's going to happen to a society? Well, longevity, security, stability, they're going to break down.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing.
That's a good point. And then the natural temptation is we said this word before, Luddite, but to be a discarder of technology. And that can't be right, but there's got to be something to where we rein it in and it doesn't exercise control of our life. So, okay, let me ask another question here. Universal racism.
Oh, yes.
What do you got on your mind there for that?
This is a big topic. Okay.
I have an idea and a thought where you might go, but I'm interested to see if it is.
All right, so this was a conversation because one of the jokes that goes around, so in my little school that we're starting, right, in a town that's more white than Oregon, which is also already pretty white.
Yeah.
Of the 2 handfuls of students, 2 of them are not white, right? So we're kind of breaking this, like the kids. But part of what's happening is these kids all, as a sort of rebellious reaction to popular culture and political correctness, they make jokes of like, oh, that's racist because someone said the bread was white, right? Or something like that.
It's actually fun to try to do that.
It's a constant, right? Yeah. And humor is a great way to take the seriousness out of something that maybe is too serious or shouldn't be.
To illustrate with absurdity.
Yeah. So, but one of the things we had this long conversation because what I think is, in my experience going around the world, is I remember I traveled to Japan and spent a summer there teaching before I was married when I was a young teacher. And I remember I had been there 2 months and the only conversations I was having in English were with middle school and elementary students about what is your favorite food, like trying to teach them English. And I had lived with this Japanese woman who was in her 50s and no substantial conversations with her.
Sure.
So it's just this intense longing for something meaningful, somebody to talk to.
Like a mother with a newborn.
Yeah, so that's true. So I remember I was walking down the street. There was only a couple weeks left in the country, and it was this festival. Every town has a summer festival. We have the Lamb and Wool Fair.
Sure.
So their festival, streets are crowded. There's people everywhere. There's booths. But in the midst of all of this, I hear someone speaking American English across the street and through the crowd, and I froze. And I was too embarrassed. I looked over, and there's a couple, and they're talking, or 3 people, I think. And I was too embarrassed to just go up and say, you're speaking English. Let's be friends. I remember just standing there enjoying it, just getting comfort that there was someone like me in the midst of all these people that are different. And then while I'm standing on that street, I remember in college going through the food court at one of the places at Oregon State. And in this corner, all these athletes would hang out, right? And many of them were black and jovial and loud, enjoying each other and enjoying their time. Yeah. And the rest of the hall is sort of intimidated and quiet by their presence. They're big. Yeah. They're exciting. Right. They're well known.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time having this little twinge of resentment toward that. Why do they all hang out with each other? Why are they so apart? And then on the street in Japan, 2 years later, it was oh, that's why. Because it just means something to say that person's like me.
So are you putting new meaning to the word racism? Are you wanting to, because there's a negative word connotation, and I hear you saying...
I think it's the beginning of what racism is.
Okay.
So we've talked before about I was asking the question, who would you let watch your kids? Well, primarily it's someone related to you. So there's this trust that you have built into someone who's related.
Trust, yes.
People trust and feel comfort to have someone I can predict what they're going to be like.
Yeah.
I know what we're going to have for dinner when I go to their house.
Shallow or not.
Correct.
We base trust on
out
things.
of that trust, I think, is where relationship is born.
Would you say then that what happens is that out of the shallowness of that, we may use things for a trust that aren't valid, even though on the surface they appear valid.
Yeah, well,
and not trust somebody even though they are trustworthy because we don't know.
When you're just getting to know someone, all of your impressions of them, all the trust you give them is surface level.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
But what happens in my experience, and I've seen this, and I've been to quite a few countries. I think a dozen to almost 20 countries, and I've seen it on all these continents, the same thing. Like, oh, you're from the neighboring tribe, you're from the neighboring town, you're from the neighboring country.
Small groups that
I don't
gather
really trust you.
based upon these certain factors.
Correct. Yeah.
And they feel safety and trust.
Yeah. And so then out of that, so what I was trying to tell to my students about is, you're walking down the street and you see someone and you make a judgment. Everybody does. You can't stop doing it. And nor necessarily should you. You need to know, am I safe in environments where you walk, right? You need to be aware of your surroundings.
We
and
all
who's
do
safe.
it. Can't stop it.
Yeah. But so...
And it's reasonable.
So knowing that, and that everybody on Earth, like... That was part of this funny conversation I remember having multiple times during 2020 with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And this sort of sense or narrative that America was uniquely racist and corrupt.
I remember.
And it's like, oh my gosh, you guys travel the world.
Yeah.
They're all racist. It's everywhere. And it's because it's this universal phenomenon of who do you trust? And so then it comes back to, okay, who, and we've talked about this before, where am I getting my identity? Because if I say I trust people who are like me, well, how do I define me? If I define me based on my skin color, or even my like ethnic heritage, that in itself is a shallow definition of self.
Right.
Right. And so I think, okay, I have more in common with these African brothers that I visit twice a year. And fellowship with. We barely understand each other for the first couple of days. It takes me about 3 days to like wade through their accent, and I'm sure it takes them the same for mine.
You're not just making a Christian comment. That same comment could apply with another number of factors. You just happen to be the Christianity.
But the Christianity is big to me in the sense that we're on mission with the same purpose.
Right. Exactly.
We trust each other because we serve the same God.
Right.
And so I would have them to my home, right? They would be part of my community wherever we were on earth.
That's right.
But if we were walking down the street in New York and looked across at each other, we might make assumptions. We might say, I'm not sure about that
You
person.
didn't know them, and you looked
if
across.
I didn't know
That's
them.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so part of what I'm trying to do is say, okay, it's no good to, in my view, to deny that racism is around, which I've heard a lot of people say. I do have my skepticism around like how unjust are American laws simply because there are people who are poorer than others. I don't buy into that. But the idea that, nor do I buy into the idea that only white people can be racist because for some historic power dynamic.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody can be racist.
Oh, the power.
But at the same time, if we know it, and so when I was having this conversation with these middle and high schoolers that I teach, it was like, so what do you, if this is all true, like, do you guys accept that at least on some level this is true, that you have this reaction as well? And they were kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. I said, so what is your moral obligation knowing this to be true? To fix whatever perceived injustice might be happening. And it wasn't this huge burden of shame that they needed to walk around with, but rather an awareness that like, oh, we just got a new student. Her family's from Mexico.
Yeah.
Does she feel welcome here, or does she feel like she's not a part because she has this different heritage?
Almost like if you saw one of those guys you were talking about across the street in New York City that you knew, your renewed thought would be, I'm not going to make that judgment. I'm still probably not going to go over and talk to him.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to
I also don't go to talk to strangers on the street anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you have a certain protective way to live that doesn't necessarily come undone, but that doesn't mean you're going to make a judgment, because who do you know? You might find that you have more in common with them than the person you're walking right next to that looks exactly like you.
Yeah. So I've heard a couple different black men in particular. For some reason, this was unique to them. 2 different conversations I had in the wake of all this in the last 2 years, who said they would then, after all of this George Floyd and all of this sort of awareness, there was a small set of what they called like rich liberals who were sort of overly smiling at them in this awkward fashion, at the coffee shop or walking through the store, like, I don't know who you are. Why are you smiling at me?
Yeah.
But I think there's a genuine, like, I want you to make sure that I'm not avoiding eye contact with you, right? Or that I'm not scared of you because of who you are.
Yeah.
And I think there's some value to that.
I do too. Value in difficulty.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there's working things out.
It's working things out.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple questions.
Yeah.
I wrote down the word acute. So you called this universal racism. I wanted to interrupt you a few times and say, what about the word tribalism? In a sense, because you're describing an understandable beginnings of which there is then a distorted outworking that you reject, but there's an understandable underlying, given our sin-divided culture,
Right.
that trust and safety is important.
Right.
It can lead to errors, and then there can be intentional distortion. And I wondered if you wanted to like pick a different word, like tribalism. That's what's in with everybody, or do you want to say no? There's kind of this racism, but then there's an acute racism. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's shades of gray for sure. The reason I would use the word racism is because I don't think anyone, like, in the way I use words is that it needs to stop you in your
Okay, provocative.
in your flow.
I understand.
So if I make it overly academic,
Yeah.
it's not going to connect to what people are saying.
Yeah.
So if I make the argument that everybody's a little racist,
Yes.
and it's something that we work on,
yeah,
it stops the conversation a little bit to say, wait
Yeah.
a minute now, especially someone like me who's known for being maybe more aggressive than average
Yeah.
in my conservative views.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, let me tell you my little thought on this.
Okay, yeah.
Because this is humorous because it's basically the same as yours, but I approach it differently.
Yeah, okay.
I have been saying for a while, I believe that what's being the last couple of years, that is fundamentally wrong. I don't believe the United States is fundamentally racist.
Yeah.
Systemic. That's the word I
Right.
I
Yep.
don't believe there's systemic racism. But that doesn't mean there's not racism in incidents and in people.
Yeah.
But then I go back and say, on the other hand, I make the assertion every single person in the world is racist at a certain level.
Right.
Because here's what sin does. We have been divided from one another, and we're afraid and trust, and we need to be safe. So, because of that, we gravitate towards those who give off signals of safety. Now, these signals have some element of truth
Right.
and some distortion.
Yeah.
So, because you look like me, I'm tending to think that you're safe, and you might be somebody I'll hang out with in the cafeteria or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you look different, then I need to put you in the less safe category. And the first round, I'm going to avoid you.
And the reality is that's not racism.
Okay, then that's
Right.
where I want to go with it. I call it, just like you, to be a little provoking.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I said, sin, in a sense, makes us all racist, because I'm trying to load that word up then again.
Yeah.
But the reality is, all it is the distortion of sin. Sin has isolated all of us, and everyone's afraid. Everybody is.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to, it's almost unovercomable unless you get rid of sin, that this is going to be a problem to have to deal with.
Well, I think the invitation in an honest conversation is to just say, here it is. Let's do our best, right?
Well, and I
The
think,
trick is, and the reason I would push to use the word racism in that conversation is that it's the word being used, right? That if someone says, "Oh, where are you from?"
Yes,
to someone who's
that's right.
who's Asian,
I
you know,
agree.
well, I'm from LA. What do you mean,
Yes.
right? It's so that's getting termed as an aggression.
I would prefer
And
to
then a
have
racism.
another term, because I think it's cleaner, and then you can say the word racism for the distortions that are ugly and gross.
Right.
But what's happening in our culture is that word is they're trying to throw in so much with it. I'm like you then. I'm going to provocatively include the other kind.
Yeah.
Just to force discomfort, right?
Yeah.
And see if we can
Well,
get somewhere.
and try to push toward clarity, saying, if that's not what you mean, why are you saying that?
Yeah. I agree.
The other side of it too is what I do see, and I think it's actually growing since people want to say since Trump, but I would say argue since Obama.
I have the same
and
argument.
not to blame Obama uniquely,
Yeah.
but that there was a movement that began to say if you criticize us, it's because you're racist.
Yes.
And what I saw and heard a lot of people concur is a
Though
lot
he
more
didn't-
people were racist because of it. And they said, "Oh, you're calling
Yeah.
me racist."
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say is the difference between saying, "Oh, I'm not sure if I trust this person because they look different than me," versus saying, "Oh, actually, I'm superior to them."
Yeah.
Because they look different from me.
Yeah.
And that's where the real racism is.
Okay, I agree with that. So another word I wrote down as you're talking, power. Because one of the things I think that's stunning in this conversation is there has been an attempt to redefine racism.
Of course.
And it is based on power differential rather than the old definition was, if you are of a different nation than me, it's racist. It's not racist if I think you're different and we don't understand and we can probe each other's differences, even laugh at them.
Sure.
What's racist is if I look at you and I think I'm actually superior. I'm morally maybe made in God's image more than you.
Right.
And those then are the disruptions. And that's what I think is interesting about that is when I look at the little bit of history I know about slavery, but which is mostly from reading history and theological stuff.
Okay.
And that is that it has happened since the beginning.
Slavery.
Slaves.
Oh,
It's
yeah. It's universal.
We'll have to sometime talk about the Second Timothy and First Timothy, how Paul addresses slavery. It is stunning because he does not undo it.
Right.
He does not stand against it.
You basically got Philemon to go with if you're going to try to
And then there's the
dismantle slavery.
Philemon thing, yeah. And basically he treats it as a fact of the world that God didn't treat as the highest problem.
Well, so here's how I would interpret what they're doing. Biblically, when they say slaves obey your masters, right? Is saying if every authority on earth is established by God, then that would include slave owners. That's a crazy thing to say.
It is. That's right.
Yeah.
If you can get free, great.
Yeah.
But don't spend your life trying to get free, Christians.
Right.
Submit to this unjust, and this is, I almost wish I hadn't gone here about this up because this is really, talk about what's it, triggering somebody, you know. This
Of course.
Yeah. But this is, it's the conversation needs to be had. Conversation. We're really not having it because you and I have a lot of agreement. But it's just interesting. So what I think had happened in our country, and I think, incidentally, I don't know what you think about this, I think it was uniquely because our country had Christian roots. That we brought, in a sense, Christianity to buttress the arguments.
Okay.
So take a pagan culture, and if one person enslaves another, they may be of a different race, they may be of the same race. By and large, it was an economic dynamic at play. We conquered you, you make money for me.
Not only that, but if you commit a crime, it's not like ancient cultures have a complex prison system. You just become a slave. That's your crime.
Yeah, that's right. There's lots of things like that. So there was, I think, some groups felt better than other groups.
Well, and that feels like justice too, right? If you think, well, like Manifest Destiny, we conquered these people because they were corrupt and we are better. Our God is with us, right?
Yes.
Then their enslavement is justice for their sinful ways.
That's true.
And then if the criminal is also enslaved, maybe he's your neighbor, but he's a criminal.
Yeah.
That's also justice.
Yeah.
So slavery feels right.
Yeah. And so I think what ended up happening in America is that slavery twisted, it started in an economic way like it had in other eras. But because of our Christian roots and the spread of culture in the United States, it became Christianized and justified, and there became a disgust element of superiority.
Right.
And we as one race are superior to you another. And I think that gets into that is flat out the worst kind of slavery, and not slavery, but racism.
Right.
And I think that whole smiling because we want you to know we're okay, I do think our nation has guilt, has two forms. One, actual guilt, but I think also we suffer from a hangover. I think that is, it continues to affect us. Even though I agree that it has been exacerbated, it is race baiting. One party tries to make an issue out of this because of a constituency development.
Sure.
But even without that, it's a wound. I don't see a problem with saying that there's been a deep wound in our country that has taken a long time, and I think it's much better than it used to be, but it's still a wound, and it's more of a wound than it was when it's just economics.
Right.
I conquered you, and therefore you work for me and help me, or you committed a crime and now you're enslaved to me, or I conquered you, or I bought you and you're a slave for 7 years. You couldn't pay a debt. Now your family and children are a slave to me. Yeah. Whatever those factors, unjust that there may be, there was less crappy stuff in it.
Yeah.
I think. So less wound. Even though it was painful, I'm sure it wasn't fun, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, interesting. Universal racism.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey,
you wanted to talk
I'm
about
gonna do forgiveness. Yeah. But before we do that, let's do one of our little promos here.
Okay.
We got a promo.
All right. So I want to recommend in this episode. I want to recommend Staten Wood Windows.
Are they paying you any money?
He's not. No. This is my friend Max Strawn, and I've worked with him. I've done some carpentry with him actually.
Yeah.
And he's a
you
phenomenal
tell the
craftsman.
story first tell the story. You said, what should we say?
Yeah, so I sent him a text and I said, "Hey, can you give me 2 or 3 sentences? We'll put it in. It'd be fun for the podcast." And we're sort of trying to say, "Hey, if we're a real podcast, maybe we get sponsors eventually, but we want to help
no,
promote
we'll see.
some
Yeah.
people."
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he replied, this was the quote, "We make good windows and doors." Right?
I love
So
that.
I was like, okay, there it is.
There it
But,
is.
Their specialty or his specialty.
make good stuff.
He has a crew of guys, but they make. I would describe it as they make windows and doors the way a really neat house built in 1920 would have them, right?
So no vinyl?
So those double hung glass with the putty that holds it in, and that sort of thing. Glazing, yeah. So apparently I'm a good glazer. I was helping him out.
Really?
And he's like, "Hey, you want to glaze that window?" And I went right to it.
Hey, if you're a good glazer.
And then the other
there's
guys
some
who's
money in that
tried
for
at it.
restoration.
Yeah, the other guys who have tried it, they were like, "How have you done that before?" I was like, "No." But I just apparently I got the knack for it. So anyway, Staten Wood Windows, check him out.
Yeah.
He's on Instagram.
Yeah. All right.
They do good work.
Okay, forgiveness.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one of the things I wanted to bring up. I've been thinking about this forgiveness. I want to keep coming back to this a few times until we've kind of explored some different things, because we talked about it once for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking, I've come and settled on a set of terms that are okay, but functional versus forensic. Okay, so there's 2 different kinds of forgiveness that we need to bear in mind when we think about. So the practical side is somebody does something to you, and for the moment we'll just say it's grievous enough that there's a lot of pain,
Yeah.
and you have to deal with it. And then there's a lot of scenarios. Sometimes they admit it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you may never see the person again. Maybe a drunk driver who hit your grandma. You
Yeah.
never meet them.
Right.
What do you do with those things? So there's a lot of dynamics, but I think a lot of people face forgiveness issues and don't know what to do. And I think they're being told a lot of things that I don't think are biblical. So here's one of them. It says in Scripture, you should forgive one another as God, sometimes it says in Christ, has forgiven you. Well, let's think about that for a minute. I would like to assert that that's an impossible statement, the way we are inclined to understand what it means.
Okay.
We're inclined to think the way God has forgiven us. Okay, I come to God, I ask for forgiveness, I hear this story about Jesus, that He's taken my sins, He's paid for my sins. And therefore, the gospel ends up saying to me, my debt has been paid.
Yeah.
God is able to open His arms to me willingly because the delight He has for His Son Jesus
Yeah.
is what He has for me, because not only did He take my guilt, but He gave me His obedience.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this is this gospel exchange. And the extent of this is, I know a lot of the sins that I commit, but the older I get and the more I learn, oh my goodness, I hardly know any of them. There's more there than I ever knew.
Yeah.
And we're grateful that He does it all the way and we don't even understand it, right? So that's part of the offer. And even the obedience, we learn that His obedience, boy, I just don't even know how to understand that. I'm thankful that the exchange is I got all of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm calling that the forensic. Well, we can't do that to another person, ever.
So when I
Ever.
think of that, and because I feel like you're putting more into it than I have in the past, okay?
Okay.
So when I think of forgiving as God forgives, it's simply that someone who wrongs you in a really significant way is under wrath the way that John 3, what is
Okay.
it, 17 describes, right? I didn't come to condemn the world, but the world is already condemned.
Okay.
I came to set it free.
Okay.
And so that we're making this offer as those who follow Christ, that the way we've been forgiven is to turn from our sins or to turn to God in contriteness of heart. But barring that, you remain on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say, okay, I'm willing to forgive somebody 77 times in a day after day, as they repent. But I'm also willing to push someone who's not repenting to the point of excluding them from friendship and connection.
Yeah. So maybe you have natively taken that, because I'm calling that a functional forgiveness.
Okay.
And I do think that that's what's in the passage there.
Yeah.
It's not forensic. It's not
Okay.
the legal one in the passage. If it is, it's impossible, because I can't know your motives. I can't actually absolve you. What I can only really do is let go of something in relation to you and give you, in our relationship, in a sense, a clean slate if there's repentance and whatnot. So
Okay. So what do you do with Jesus saying to the apostles, the one you forgive is forgiven? Because isn't he giving them a forensic
No, I
authority?
don't think so. I think it's functional.
Okay.
Because it's impossible. Let's say I'm an apostle and you're somebody I don't know what you've done. I know this much of it. I know I'm holding my fingers an inch high here, and it may be a foot deep.
Right.
I don't know your motives. I don't know. We do some things we mean to do them, and there's other things. And a person says, I didn't mean to do that. It's
Right.
true. They didn't mean. They hurt us and they sinned against us, but they didn't mean to wound us so deeply. And another person sins against us, and they meant malice. We just don't know. We can't plumb that depth. We can't get
and
there.
to complicate it, there are times when you did mean malice, but have convinced yourself after the fact that you didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? That in your guilt,
We just can't get to
you
that.
rationalize things.
We can't even get to our own. So we say, search me, O God, see if there's anything wicked in me. The scriptures talk about dividing between the bone and marrow, the thoughts and intentions of the heart.
Right.
So what I conclude is when he says that, forgive as I forgive, what we have to do is realize in that passage, he is allowing his forgiveness to us to be in these general relational functional terms.
Okay.
We did something wrong.
Yeah.
We said we're sorry, and he lets it go so that we can have a good relationship again.
Right.
And that what's not in view there is the legal or the detail. And I use the word forensic partly because it feel functional and forensic. I like the F, but forensic has this sense of every DNA spatter of blood kind of idea, right? Every little factual thing. It's whereas functional is what makes it work between us.
Yeah. Right.
Not all the details necessarily,
Okay.
but there is a detailed forgiveness, and that's the last day. And that's what Jesus did on the cross, is this detailed with all the intents and purposes. So I think what happens to us is people get caught up and not aware that what they're doing is they're thinking about this person that sinned against them. And they think, they don't realize what they've done. See, what they're probing there is, they saw an inch and I'm seeing 2 inches. How can I forgive them if they don't see 2 inches of problem here?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
maybe there's 3 inches and I don't even see it all. How
But-
can I?
Okay, so
you know?
isn't that just describing what it means to love your enemies? Because so if the Matthew
No, I don't think
18
so.
progression is
Yeah.
that I'm basically making you my enemy if you refuse to back down.
Okay, maybe it's on the same sliding scale, so to speak.
Yeah,
Because
because
we're get there.
because as I read, especially I think Paul, he's very quick at times to condemn people, to say they stand condemned.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah,
Peter
yeah.
stood condemned when he was
Yeah.
refusing to accept Gentiles as the way he accepted Jews, right?
Yeah.
Or the divisive person, you warn them twice and they're self-condemned and they deserve it.
Yeah.
Like, let them go.
Yeah.
And so that to me feels like the command Jesus is saying is if you say someone's sins are forgiven, they're not.
Yeah.
But I would assume they're doing that in cooperation with the Spirit. They're not out on their own.
Yeah.
If you're taking on that mantle without the
But so what I though is I take that out of the realm of literally their sins are forgiven. No,
Right.
it isn't literally. It's functionally.
okay.
And so let's say your enemies, for example. What's
So when
happening?
Paul's saying they stand condemned, isn't that a forensic? Isn't that a literal?
Okay, that's a good question. I think yes and no. I think he's looking forward to the standing before the judgment, and it's operating functionally now. We're
Right.
going to function under that, but I think no, because I think he says, I don't even judge myself
Right.
at one point.
Yeah.
He is not willing to take on to himself the role that I know the depths of this stuff.
Yeah.
We're all going to stand before God and have to give an account, and he's going to probe and find out what's real and what's not. And I don't even judge myself in this matter.
Okay, but in that context, and I think that's 1 Corinthians when he's saying I don't judge myself. He says the spiritual man judges all things, but is judged by no one. And so what I take that to mean is if I'm living in a state of perpetual repentance, where I'm before God in humility saying, I know I'm making mistakes, but I'm doing what I can do and I want to walk with you, that then I don't have to stop and micro-analyze.
I agree with that. Yes.
Okay.
That's functional.
But then in that state, he's also saying, as the spiritual man, I am then free to judge rightly the wrong and the right that's set before me.
But still, I think what's being judged there is functional judging. They're not taking to themselves this forensic legal.
They're not taking upon themselves the vengeance of God
That's
to decree
right.
that you go to heaven or
So
hell. Okay, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, the word forgiveness is an interesting word. It's the word really for releasing or letting go.
Yeah.
And it's called semantic range when you come to these Greek words or other language words.
Yeah.
What range do they have? And we have that in English. We just don't think about it because it's our native tongue. But the word forgiveness that gets translated is the same word for letting go of something or releasing something.
That makes sense.
Which is an interesting thing because I think then what it's arguing is that it's a functional term. When you release something, it's not the same, or let go of something, it's not the same of absolving somebody of their guilt.
Okay.
So if you do something wrong let's say you do something wrong to me and you apologize.
Right.
If I forgive you, I'm actually, in a sense, not absolving you. I'm just letting it go and saying functionally our relationship can be okay. But there's still a day you have to answer to him. You have to explain
You're
this.
leaving it to God.
You're leaving it to God at this forensic, absolving level and saying, I can't do that. But functionally, if you say, I'm sorry, then what forgiveness is, I've come to think, is this agreement that we'll leave it be for the moment and let God handle the real stuff later. But for what I can judge, to the measure that I can see, the inch that I can see inside of your heart, even if there's a foot level of sin, the inch that I can see, and you apologize for the inch that you see or the 3/4 is close enough.
Right.
Okay, we can functionally be at peace. We know that someday we'll stand before him. And here's where this part of this comes from.
Okay.
So there's a situation I was involved in, and somebody sinned and hurt me and my family deeply.
Yeah.
And not repentant, not acknowledging, et cetera, et cetera.
Was it a full blame shift, like it's actually your fault?
Oh yeah, that was involved too.
Yeah.
And I did have fault in things.
Of course. I mean, we always do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, this person's refusal, in a sense, to address this and face into it was painful for me. Not knowing I was told, you have to forgive this person. Complete forgiveness.
Yeah.
Even if they don't repent. And I came to reject that idea on a few different levels. One we talked about last time, but this whole idea of letting go, what I came to believe is that functionally, because he's not acknowledging something, we can't be at peace.
Right. Yeah.
And so in one sense, I don't offer him forgiveness functionally.
Okay.
Now, I still have to have my heart not captivated to unforgiveness, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so what I've come to this idea is that I'm to let go towards God and that it's his to handle. Now, I'm still functionally not restored with this person and can't be and won't be until there's repentance.
Acceptance
and
of
if there
guilt.
never is, then there will never be functionally, in a sense, you could say, I'm not forgiving him.
Correct.
I don't like that word in that way because I'm also, in a sense, I have given him the forgiveness towards God.
Right.
And in a sense, I've let go and released it.
So here's how I would verbalize that. That what you did was you saw that you were letting the sun go down in your anger day after day.
Oh yeah, that would
right?
work. Yeah.
And what you were doing is saying, "Wow, I don't forgive them for the reasons you're stating." In other words, I'm not
We're
actively
not functionally at peace.
I'm not actually putting our relationship back together.
That's right.
Because that's not going to work.
It
can't. But I also can't be captive an anger that turns to bitterness.
Yes.
And makes my heart turn to stone.
Yes. Now, the anger, let's talk about that for a sec. At first, when that happened, for a long time.
Yeah.
And it still is there somewhat. You feel guilty about the anger. You feel wrong about it.
Right.
And it's not that that's untrue, but let's take another tack. It's not wrong to have anger.
Correct. Yeah.
Because sin is deserving of anger. Mine are too.
Even if they've sinned against you.
That's right.
Right? Because I always heard,
Exactly
wrong.
Right.
It's only wrong if it's selfish. And I'm like, well.
Yeah.
But if someone betrays you, if someone hurts you in that significant way.
Yeah. And this is where I think we're not going to go here, by the way.
Okay.
But your circle. And your circle
the
with...
3 circles.
The one circle with the political spectrum one.
Yeah.
I toyed with the idea of justice being one of that horizontal things. Because there is in the left this idea that I want to right wrongs.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's true and right.
That's right.
And there is something on the right that says, don't get hung up in that. You can't fix that.
And the thing is some of the reactionary right tries to deny injustices that are legitimate.
That's right. And that's
like, oh my gosh, you guys,
pitfall.
which is the racism conversation among many others.
It is. I
Yeah.
agree with you. So the reality is that to be angry when somebody sins and wounds you deeply, actually does express a wrong in the world.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. Now, the problem is when it becomes debilitating to you and you don't let go of it, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
it's a discovery, I think, to realize it's not wrong to be angry about this.
Yeah.
It's not wrong. Now, anyway, so let me say one more thing then. Here's what I ended up doing with it. And I thought this was a discovery. So I wrote letters to this person over 3 years.
Wow.
Okay, non-sent letters. I was working on
I was
a
going to
letter.
say, did they ever send one back? But okay.
No. So, and I wrote these letters, and I worked on it for like 3 years.
Yeah, wow.
And it was me working on me before God is what it was.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
thinking through this, it's a process. Anyway, I get to a place where the communication wasn't, and I thought, I think this was just for me. I didn't send it.
Okay.
Over a year goes by, and then this person pops back up and tries to pretend.
In what way?
Through texting, trying to connect with me
Okay.
as if nothing had happened, or that it's a little thing that we can get by this now because enough time has gone by.
Right.
And it's like, that is not right. So I thought, I worked on it a little bit more, and I got ready to send it. I shared it with a person that doesn't know this situation or these people.
Yeah.
And the problem is this person is a very nice, complimentive person. It'd be like sharing with my wife, except my wife is involved in this one. But they have a hard time saying difficult things.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So they're very positive.
We call that the peace and harmony.
Yes, that
Yeah,
person. So, but that's a discerning individual, and I really respect this person. So anyway, they read it, and so here was there something wrong with, yeah. They were complimentive, but you could, and so when they're doing that, it's like, oh. So I went back and tried to read.
They could feel the weight
they could.
of what you were writing, and that it was bearing a lot of emotion.
That's right. And they said things, it's good to be direct. Oh. So I went back and I read it through, and it's like, oh, I really tried to read it with this person's eyes. It's like, I can't send this. And this is the 4 years into this, trying to defang it of little barbs. You load words.
Right.
You say it this way, it's objectively true, but it's got this small insinuation in it.
Right.
Trying to get rid of all that stuff, right? I can't send this. This is actually, and then what I realized is, I don't want to have to give account to God for this if I send this.
Okay, so let me push a little bit, okay? Because I've had this situation, very similar, in fact, where someone who I felt significantly mistreated me in a ministry situation, in my case. Yeah. And they reached out a year or two later and said, hey, just checking in, how you doing?
Yeah.
And what I did, and I think I handled it right, but I'm interested in what your perspective, I said, hey, I'm curious if you've had any thoughts about what happened the last time we were together. And I just kind of brought it right up.
Yeah.
And they said, I'm not sure what you mean, as if nothing had happened.
Yes,
and I said, well, let me recount it for you. And I tried, this was in text.
Yeah.
So it was very brief. And I said, the last time we spoke, I brought up with you things that I thought were significant in my ability to trust you.
Yes.
Basically, here they are.
Yeah.
And they said, the response was very brief and I just don't see it that way. And I said, okay, well, in that case, I'm not sure how we could act, be friends as if these things never happened.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear back.
Yeah.
I was like, duh.
Yeah.
But I wasn't trying to poke, but rather to say,
I understand.
if you're initiating this, let's initiate it.
I agree with the way you did it, what you did.
Okay.
Especially because it sounds like it fit you, right? And where you were in relation to them, that's not what was expressing me.
Well, and our friendship wasn't a deep and long-term friend. We knew each other within a ministry capacity.
A very,
but it
very
was,
long time.
Yeah.
With a lot of dynamics in it, a lot of connection points.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here's what ended up happening, and it flows out of this functional versus forensic. I began to realize I didn't want, if I stood before God someday, I didn't want that letter to be the thing I sent. I wouldn't want that read in the
yeah.
record. Oh, I got to do something. I felt like for the first time I actually needed to send something. Well, one morning I lay in bed, half asleep, half awake, and I had this idea, semi-vision, not in the technical word vision, but maybe in a non-technical way. I envisioned myself standing before God and this person standing there
Yeah.
and all the people we know standing there. And that God says, okay, you guys were not able to resolve, as much as lies in you, be at peace with all men. You guys were not able to resolve this. What's going on?
They're going to have it out in front of the cloud of witnesses.
That's right. And he says to me, Mike, you go first.
yeah.
And I thought, I need to write something to him that would stand up to that question up there.
Wow. Yeah.
So I began to redo the letter. I let certain paragraphs stay and the flow of it, but I redid it as a judgment. I had God asking me questions. God asked me questions.
Did you do that explicitly? Like in the letter,
Yes.
you said you
I
described
did it
your
like
attempt.
a script.
Wow.
I put the word God,
Yeah.
colon, his question to me, Mike, and my responses. Now, here's what ended up happening.
Yeah. I don't know if that'd make it better or worse, but
It
it's
was
serious the
it
way
was
you did
better.
it. Okay. Good.
And here's why. He went places. It became a real God thing. And I never approach it from the beginning to be a gimmick.
no. Right. Yeah.
But it became far more than I ever thought it was because he asked me questions I didn't know he was going to ask.
In the process of
In
writing
the
it.
process. Now, and this gets into, which maybe we'll talk about someday, the whole how the Holy Spirit talks to us.
Yeah.
My conviction is that he uses our spirit as his voice so that it's our words. It's the spirit of the man is the lamp of the Lord, it says in Proverbs.
Okay.
So he uses our spirit as a lamp to shine on us what he wants us to see. He
And that would
already
make
knows
sense
everything.
because when it describes prophets false prophesying, it says that they just followed what their hearts wanted
Yeah, that's right.
because they didn't really know the
That's right.
difference.
It also makes sense that if the Lord speaks to you, and then I had a friend once who said the Lord hit me upside the head with a 2x4. Said,
Yeah.
you dummy.
Yeah.
My first response, and this is when I was first opening myself up to this idea of the way Lord talking and that it wasn't part of Scripture and everything, is I said to this person's name, and I said, I said it in my head, I don't think the Lord said it. The Lord's not going to call you a dummy,
Yeah.
okay? I changed my mind after a while because what I realized was, no, because that's how that person talks. God uses his voice to talk to him. Now, there may be things that he wouldn't have said to him,
Yeah.
but you dummy, that guy was not offended by that. It would have been hurtful to me.
Oh, I see. Sure. Sure.
And my spirit, I don't think God would ever have my spirit say, Mike, you dummy, hit you up by the side of the head with a 2x4.
Right.
It just wouldn't happen that way. So I began to realize that God used our spirits that way. What that means is when God says something to you, it can sound in a way that it would never sound to me. He wouldn't say the same thing to me with those same words.
Right.
If he was going to say those same things, right? So as
It
I'm
reminds
writing
me
it-
of Jesus calling his disciples like little faith, like, come on, you guys. Like there is a pushing that he does, or when he comes down from the Mount of Transfiguration, it's like, how long do I have to put up with this generation? There is a place for it.
Yes.
But at the same time, a tender reed, he's not going to break.
He's not going to break. And what it means to break one reed versus another is
right.
going to be different.
That's right.
And what words he can use with one and it won't break them, and the same words to another would shatter them, destroy them.
right.
And so anyway, as I was rewriting this and writing my questions, God began to ask me things that I didn't expect. And I ended up having to answer. I had to look at answers. I had to defend some of my things.
So you were almost making your own confession in a letter that you initially
That's
were writing
exactly what
as
it was like.
as an accusation.
Yes,
I mean, maybe
had
not
some-
accusation,
yes,
but
yes. Well, accusation, right? Because of this phrase.
Yeah.
What do you have against your brother?
right.
You
Yeah.
have something against your brother. Here's what it says: if you're at the altar and you're praying and you realize your brother has something against you,
Right.
that means an unresolved thing. Stop. Don't even pray. Don't offer a sacrifice that's commanded.
And that's not assuming that you are even in the wrong.
It's
just
exactly
that your brother
right.
has something
it's not
against
that you have something against them.
Yeah.
They may not even be accurate in your eyes.
Right.
Still stop and go figure it out.
Yeah.
So to me, the accusation was the right word because I have something against this person that they've not acknowledged.
So did you send it?
I did. And when I wrote it again, it was beautiful. It was beautiful to me.
Yeah.
It cracked me open, and I don't know that anything fundamentally changed in what I'd written in the first one, but I think what I wrote, I'm okay that it's read up there.
Yeah.
I'm okay. Everybody hears it.
Was there any additional resolution between you and this person?
No.
Oh.
So I send it.
Yeah.
And I have the wrong address. Actually, when I first sent it, I put a signature on it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be sitting there wondering, did it get lost in the mail? Rarely do things get lost in the mail.
Like you registered mail. That's what you mean.
Did registered mail.
The reception. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Comes back to me, wrong address. I end up getting the right address. By that time, I'm feeling much better with it, and I think so I didn't send it with registered mail, especially since when getting the right address, the person knew it was coming.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but haven't heard a word since. Been over a year.
Wow.
And my wife is, I got to think through what I want to say. I would say this. The interest, I could see the registered mail was a good idea because she kind of wishes we knew that it got there. She'd like to think it must not have gotten there, else there wouldn't be a response.
Oh, right. She wants to think the best.
Yeah, she wants to think the best. But anyway, what that gets to, I think, is this. By putting off, it's giving it to God. That was an act of saying, okay, I can't give you forgiveness because you're not repentant.
Right.
What do I do with this? I have to give it before God. And now that I have to communicate with you and you're not acknowledging such and such and such, how do I do that in a way that can stand up to, I got to give an account from my heart.
Yeah.
And I have to give an account for whatever I send. Right?
Well, so I see two sides to that. One is by putting it into that person's court, so to speak, right? The ball's in their court. You're also saying now that command of Christ to not go before God if you know someone has something, it's now on their side. Right.
I did.
So I think there is some absolving
of
your own
there.
guilt there.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think still of Matthew 18, that if someone is in sin, you escalate until there's either a resolution or a breaking.
I agree with that. However, there are some situations that it's not easy to functionally make that happen.
And if they're not willing to engage in the process.
If they're not willing to engage, what if they're a drunk driver?
Right.
You may never even know who they are.
Right.
And so I think that as I was thinking through this, and I'm a little abstract in how I think about things, because there was roadblocks to being able to confront.
Yeah.
Because here's what that confronting also has: another person, and eventually the church.
Yeah.
What if you don't have that option? You can't bring it before, because here's the thing. Have you ever been in a church?
Do you? Is that what you're saying? You don't have that option?
I don't have that option to bring it before. I didn't have that option while it was going on to bring the matter before the church. It wasn't going to be allowed to.
I see.
Yeah. Which it came up.
So here's a more hypothetical then.
Yes.
And I've been in this situation where church leadership is wronging me in my case.
Yeah.
And I was very conflicted about, okay, bringing it to the church would look a lot like actively trying to break a church.
Writing a letter before, and that they can't stop or something like that.
Yeah. So, I had a leader in our ministry. So I was stepping out of ministry in a really dysfunctional situation.
Yeah.
And the leadership of that ministry asked me not to speak to anyone.
Yeah.
And I refused.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I'm not going to try to undermine your leadership. I'm not trying to pull people.
I'm not going to hide.
I'm not going to pull people after me, but these are my friends and I care for them.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to ghost them so that you can craft the narrative that best suits you.
Yes.
Because they were going to say, oh, Luke is stepping down for a personal reason. You know what I mean?
Yep, I do.
And so I didn't, but it became a personal offense that leadership had toward me.
Yeah. That's the dilemma, is if you don't have access to bring something before the church, you're cut off from it. Then that Matthew 18 process is short-circuited.
Facebook is always there.
What's interesting is that in my situation, the party also did actually send out letters to the entire church.
Wow.
Yeah. After we had come to a way of parting company, not seeing eye to eye, and how to functionally move forward,
right,
without anyway, and so yeah, I was very tempted to send out my own, right?
Sure,
But it's
yeah.
like no, I
You
might
start
be
to
wrong,
feel
but
pretty
it's-
vengeful at that point.
It is.
Yeah, like, and I was really trained deeply as a young Christian, discipled around this idea of like, touch not the Lord's anointed.
Yes.
That's
right.
The idea of standing before God saying, "Why'd
Well,
you split my church?"
Say where that passage comes from.
Oh, sure. So
Because that's a
the
great-
story of a young David who has already been selected by
Yes.
the prophet to be the next king.
He's appointed and anointed.
And now the current king is actively attempting to murder
That's
him.
right. That's right.
And yet repeatedly he chooses not to put his hand to stop that king. I mean, he's fleeing,
I'll be
but
David's
never
friend.
counterattacking.
And say, you're crazy. God put him in your hand to
That's
take his
right,
life.
yeah.
Don't you see this? You're nuts not to take advantage of this situation.
Yeah. And
David
so
says-
I still hold to that.
I do too.
That I'm not, I
do
would
too.
never try to, this is the wrong term, but to dethrone
Yep.
someone in ministry.
Yeah, yep.
Because this concept of
agree.
all authority is established by God.
Yeah, I agree.
And we're held accountable to how, so then you're dishonoring God.
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
dethroning God if you're going to say, I'm going to take down.
Are you familiar with Gene Edwards' book, Tale of Three Kings?
No.
Oh, you got to read it. Short little thing, but it's the tale of this story of David and Saul.
Okay.
And one of the things, and
Who's
it's
the
about
third king?
It is Absalom.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Absalom tries to take it from David,
That's
the
right,
kingdom. And it's his own son, right? Anyway, one of the things he says in this, and it's about study of brokenness in the church or something like that. And broken, what do you do when the leadership in your church and family you think is Saul?
Right.
And he ends up saying, don't do it. Don't walk, because he goes, is he a mad king?
Right.
And he goes, the truth is, because Absalom said the same thing about David,
Right.
right? And so his point was, you don't know. You think you know, and you might be right.
Well, and I just re-listened to this story. So what I've been doing recently, because I have days where I'm doing a lot of like carpentry work. I just put the headphones on.
yeah.
And I worked through like 4 Old Testament books on a day, so you can get a lot of Bible in 6-7 hours
Yeah.
of headphones. But it's a very different experience to listen to all of that story of basically David's whole life in an afternoon.
Yeah.
And one of the things that dawned on me was how right Absalom was.
I know.
That David refused to deal with so many
I know.
things in his
I know
leadership.
it. I know.
And it was again and again and again, and it was
I know.
never resolved.
I know.
And you see these same patterns.
Yep.
And yet, right, the difference was what David did with Saul. I mean, who am I to say, well, this leader who's in my life is Saul and not David?
That's Gene
Because they're
Edwards'
both
main
dysfunctional.
point.
Yeah.
And you might be seeing accurate things.
Right.
But is it a mad king or the Lord's anointed?
Well, and so this is something, and this is what maybe we can talk about this next time because we're past our hour.
Yeah.
Is the difference between being the leader and the advisor to the leader. And I want to, maybe next time we can put that on the docket.
Okay.
Of what is it, what's the weight you bear as a leader? What are the pitfalls of that leadership? But also,
There's unique things in it.
what is it you're supposed to do to not be...
That'd be an interesting one. We started, I don't know if this is where you're going with it, but we started when we were talking about the question, what do you want to share or not share? And you said, in public, there was things I couldn't say.
Right.
So when you have this leader mantle on you,
Well, and
there's
that's how I
things given
feel.
you, and there's things restricted.
Yeah. And I've tried to stay aware of that now in the place. I mean, I still have leadership, but it's much more limited capacity. It's church, it's the small school that I'm developing. But it's easy for me to say. I find myself reminding myself of that a lot. It's easy for me to say that someone who's a school teacher or principal should push back against the state machine who's saying you have to do this corrupt and godless thing. So anyway, next time.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up. What did you talk about today? Forgiveness, racism. We kind of hit both our things.
I know. Look at us.
Wandered around. That's not so bad. All right. I think you're going to outro us with a little music this time,
All right.
huh?
Yeah. We'll see you guys
Is that
next
it?
time.
You're clicking it. We're fading away. All right.
That's right.